So let's talk about the legislative branch has now voted in committee to declassify the House intelligence memo on FISA and the 702 abuses that everybody's been talking about. But it also is including systemic, fraudulent, and corrupt DOJ and FBI officials using it and how they use it and what ensued by their usage of it because it was illegal. This is all due to the efforts, though, of the OD&I. Dan Coates was the one that declassified that April 2017 FISA court opinion that was regarding the historic the Department of Justice and the FBI FISA 702 abuses that was reported by NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers. That's right. People in the NSA actually doing good work for a change. Right. That was then discussed by former NSA Director William Binney on InfoWars. Once that came out, the dominoes have been falling with lots of momentum. Reading between the lines on recent quitting of the FBI, these recent, I'm quitting, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Right. Many of the first waves of early retirements and public walkouts of government buildings are going to be all about the leaks. This is going to be about the leak investigation and the leakers first. Remember, any leaks of behind-the-scenes material by the investigation agencies, and or legislative branch members are felony releases of classified intelligence. And the leakers are the first to go as they roll up the higher-ups. This is what we're seeing now, and now we're getting beyond the subordinates and administration. We're actually getting to the first and second in charge. So the memo needs to be released to destroy the narrative. This is important right here, Jason. The narrative of the false premise and the presentations of the intelligence apparatus being separated from the executive branch. That's all a house of cards is going to come down. Because now it will become public that they are not. They're attached at the hip. They're working together illegally, routinely, and outside of the agency's recognized mission statements for why they were set up in the first place.
So you mean Obama going outside of the law, essentially, to work with Comey and McCabe to do these things, among others?
Absolutely. This goes straight to the top. So remember, in part one of our OIG investigation story, we lined out how Horowitz went to war versus the Obama administration, the background, the history of it with all the evidence. Just a quick review. Horowitz was nominated in 2011, and during that time, Attorney General Holder was in a major scandal of Fast and Furious and Benghazi. He then decided with his legal team, this is what we discussed, to change the investigational powers of the OIG because his buddy, his old law practice buddy, was supposed to be in charge, but he didn't want to he didn't want to leave too much power in place because remember, the IG has to investigate at the request of the Senate Judiciary Committees or the intelligence committees. So he wanted to make sure to prevent Horowitz from being able to do too good a job. So in short, what we showed was that once Holder turned the investigational powers into what's called investigational requests, everything could be stonewalled, red taped into non-compliance. So there was serious limitation on access to records. And what we're going to talk about today is that those limitation of records first started showing up with FOIA requests. Okay, and that's what Grassley really started to get involved. That's what our presentation is going to talk about today. Well, this becoming powerless and being drowned in red tape really pissed off Horowitz. So he demonstrated very quietly behind the scenes the problems with it and how it affected a very bloated budget to the committee. And despite his swampy association and his swampy background, he did go to war against Eric Holder and Obama, and he won. So once he fought back, because remember, he went to the same law office that they all go through, Cadwalder and Wickersham and Taft. So there was no evidence this guy was going to be what he is. He turned into a hero and a lawman, but who saw that coming? So in our original Part 1 presentation, we demonstrated how the IG with Horowitz, once they won that war, they decided that the inspector generals no longer are going to have to fight certain access to records. They now had access to it. So Horowitz laid the groundwork for alliance with Congress, and that's what we talked about. The alliance of what we call now in the White Hat community the kitchen cabinet members. The kitchen cabinet is this alliance with Horowitz that have been working behind the scenes to get investigational OIG independence. That kitchen cabinet is led by a guy named Senator Chuck Grassley. He happens to be the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So what we're going to talk about today is how they've been working behind the scenes, and it's starting to become public. And it really started to become public in 2015. There were little snippets here and there, but it really come to the forefront in 2015. Once he got through all the hearings and all the stuff that he did to fight the war that we went through in our first presentation and won, what it led to was some important bills. Okay, the first one we talked about was H.R. 5492 in the House, which was Shelby and Issa. They brought out the Inspector General Empowerment Act of 2014. Once it passed, it went to the Senate. That's when Senator Chuck Grassley introduced on February 26th of 2015, Senate Bill 579, the Inspector General Empowerment Act of 2015. Now, this was the first signs that there was publicly an alliance between Grassley and the IG's office with Horowitz. Obama and the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel tried to fight back in July of 2015, and they were just buried because the quick reaction of the OIG and Horowitz to what they argued, which was a lot of legal silliness in their 68 pages, was really demonstrating to both sides of the aisle that the OIG was being unable to follow the orders of the power structure of Congress. And that was genius because he presented it in such a way to tell Congress, you guys have no power anymore. So when you tell me to do something, I can't do it, so you guys are nobody anymore. And it worked perfectly. But what was interesting was in his answer, he was addressing what was in the 68 pages that we talked about was foreshadowing. What did the Office of Legal Counsel for Obama say? Well, it was all about the Federal Wiretap Act. In the 2.5-page legal argument response, they were talking about how the IG had to do this in this way in order to be able to have an independent investigation. So that led to December 7th, 2016, Jason Chaffetz introduced an H.R. 6450, the Inspector General Empowerment Act of 2016. It passed, went to the Senate, majority. Horowitz won his war, and Obama had to sign it. So now we're going to talk about what became of that.
Right.
So what happened is the OIG now has access to all the information that the investigational targets and their target agencies possess. Now understand, that means this includes their internal documentation and data, emails and text messages, hint, hint, but also that which the agency externally collected and documented. Okay, so with the OIG's new and restored powers, what you have is Horowitz suddenly becoming big on public disclosure. First of all, he started going public on radio shows leading up to that. That hadn't never been done before. He wanted to talk about his findings in the media. Then in May of 2017, he opened up a Twitter account called @OversightGov. On October 1st of 2017, he created a website called OversightGov. All of that went live, and he started posting memos, memorandums, citations, investigational announcements, and letters to Congress. And, of course, only a few of us white hats were reading them. Okay. But one thing was for certain, what you're looking at is Horowitz was not behaving like part of the club. He's behaving like a real lawman. So what happened was Horowitz's efforts to roll back holders' restrictions was being coordinated. And what happened was brand new FBI Director Christopher Wray and the Senate Judiciary Committee, they start getting all of this stuff being aggregated and presented to them towards the end of last year. And that's when Christopher Wray started working closely with Horowitz and Sessions to clean house and work with the strike force in Congress that we're calling the kitchen cabinet members.
Right.
But their ringleader is Senator Chuck Grassley. Senator Grassley becomes a bulldog, or Jedi Knight, if you will, to us Star Wars geeks. That struck back at the evil empire. And so this is where our story picks up for part two. So what we're going to talk about is Senate Judiciary Chairman Grassley's oversight investigation started, okay, into the political corruption of the FBI and Department of Justice. What his work was, and it wasn't covered at all in MSM, But what he started to do that's interesting had to do with FOIA requests. So what we're going to talk about is, you got to understand that because he's the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he has primary oversight of the FBI and the Department of Justice. So what you have is Senator Grassley quietly collaborative work behind the scenes with OIG and a very methodical 2+ year oversight investigation that started all the way back in December of 2015. Now, the first time we discovered that Grassley and Horowitz are working together and have forged an alliance really became public in December 15, 2015, on the floor of the Senate. There was a very animated and fierce Senator Grassley taken to the floor, and man, did he lay it out. And that's the YouTube video.
About this piece of legislation. But there's an important principle here, a very important principle that we ought to keep in mind, because it's an insult to 100 senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives. When legislation's written and you explain very clearly what that legislation is supposed to accomplish, that an inspector general would have access to all records, and then you have a lawyer in the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice, one person making an interpretation of a law that's contrary to congressional intent, but that one person out of 2 million people in the executive branch of government that can override the will of 535 members of Congress. And that will was expressed way back in 1978. And just a little different quote of a letter that Senator Johnson's already talked about from a respected member of this Senate for 24 or maybe 30 years, Senator John Glenn of Ohio, who was very much interested in making sure that we had strong oversight by Congress and within the executive branch, that they had strong.
So Senator Grassley was talking about Senator Glenn and oversight and the powers of the OIG, basically.
And remember, that was in response to this ridiculous 68 pages that the legal counsel for Obama and Holder put out, saying why they felt like they had to keep rein in the IG on certain subject matter, especially regarding the Federal Wiretap Act. So he's basically saying no, okay? As the head of the Oversight Committee, he relies heavily on the IG to gather information and conduct oversight. That's why the IGs were created in the first place. They're the eyes and ears of Congress. If Senator Grassley's oversight investigation was going to succeed, he would need to empower the IG's office. So what we saw in January of 2016 was with Grassley, because he had primary oversight of the FBI and DOJ, in addition, the Senate Judiciary Committee also has primary oversight of FOIA requests. It is in this capacity that Grassley begins his investigation by triggering the State Department IG's office. Now remember, there's a bunch of branches to IG. This is the investigational branch that oversees the State Department. So the Department of State's IG's branch began investigating the State Department's FOIA non-compliance in late 2015, releasing a report in January 2016. In the report, it says OIG highlights at the top of it, January 2016. That report raised further questions that Grassley wanted to answer with respect to why are we withholding legally requested documents that are not classified. The trap was laid out there for non-compliance by the State Department. And you could read that public document, but what he was saying in there basically is there is a concerted effort to withhold evidence that needs to be pursued further. And he went into great detail about it on that page. Now, at this point, he's investigating only publicly the State Department's circumvention of FOIA requests, especially with respect to Hillary's secret server. Right. That's when the TikTok messages started. Note the IG and Grassley's information cycle. You started to see a pattern. The IG report goes to Grassley, leading to requests for further questions, and then the investigations request to the OIG, which in turn leads to Grassley releasing letters to Congress, then followed with a speech on the floor about the findings. Of course, as the process repeats over and over, there is absolutely no coverage of it in MSM, and to be honest, not much in the independent media. So on April 4th of 2016, a big one came out. It was called the All Records Request Announcement. And this was the one that was an earthquake up on the Hill, but nobody covered it in the media. In the Watergate scandal, the people involved in the Watergate scandal tried to cover up and not release all records. So this scandal led to Congress creating the IGs, and the IGs need access to agency records. That's why the law authorized the OIG to access all. I want to emphasize that record, all records. So in that speech, it was funny because it was a rebuttal speech by Harry Reid. It was called "Let Me Tackle That" on the floor. So here's what he said. The FBI is investigating this matter as well as several other investigations. We keep hearing that the FBI's inquiry is just a security review,
right,
and not a criminal inquiry. So let me tackle that, he said. Interesting how Reid changed language of the discussion on the floor to a security review and not a criminal inquiry. Now we know he was lying. And not only was he lying, but Grassley fired back. And that's when Grassley really became the IG's bulldog. And now the bulldog is starting to get some momentum. So that was a key turning point. Grassley's fighting on two fronts now. He's trying to restore the powers of the IG with the kitchen cabinet members while also investigating state FOIA violations. He already established his state broke the law. Now he wants to know what the FBI is going to do about it. Notice how aggressive the tone of the bulldog becomes. This is a huge key transition change. So starting in May and June of 2016, you start seeing what we call the incredible scathing letters. Grassley officially turns his sights on Comey, on Lynch, and on the FBI and DOJ. This is what he said to Director Comey. One sentence. I'm writing in regard to the FBI's ongoing investigation related to Secretary Clinton's use of a non-government server, an email address for official State Department business. In particular, I'm writing to raise concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest by the Justice Department officials and seek your input about possible remedies. Guess what happened? Nothing. Not a thing. Grassley presented his FOIA oversight case against the State Department's FOIA violation in letter addressed straight to Comey, Lynch, and the Obama's FBI DOJ. There was no response. Ever. They ignored it. So on the Senate floor, Grassley goes out and he makes the following statement. Mr. President, the State Department Inspector General has released findings regarding the State Department's email practices for the last 5 secretaries of state. Did you hear that? 5 past secretaries. This report makes clear that Secretary Clinton has not told the truth to the American people about her non-government server and email arrangement with oversight by a non-government organization. As I've noted many times before, Secretary Clinton's non-government server arrangement prevented the State Department from complying with the Freedom of Information Act. Now remember, he's saying this publicly on the floor. Hillary Rodham Clinton used a private server to avoid the law that requires archiving federal records. That's an important point. This is the first time publicly that the Senate Judiciary Committee head makes the case for motive to deceive all investigations in the public on the floor. And this was still during the presidential election. This is months before the election. Not covered. So this private email and server is designed to wall her email off from the normal treatment of government oversight, as is required by law. The Inspector General found that Secretary Clinton failed to surrender all official emails to the department prior to leaving government service. Again, violation of law. The Inspector General found that Secretary Clinton's email practices, quote, did not comply with the department's policies that were implemented in accordance with the Federal Records Act. In other words, Clinton violated the law despite what Comey's going to say. Now, that's what he said on the floor. The Inspector General has made clear that Secretary Clinton neither sought nor received any permission to maintain her non-government server arrangement. That permission would have been denied. So these findings directly conflict with her many misleading public statements. Let's listen to what she actually said on July 7, 2015. Everything I did was permitted. Quote, there was no law. There was no regulation. There was nothing. That did not give me the full authority to decide how I was going to communicate. Can you believe the hubris? That statement is blatantly false and has been proven in public record now. Again, not covered in MSM. So the Hillary Rodham Clinton staff also failed to comply with department policy and record laws. They routinely conducted State Department business on personal email accounts. So on July 5th, 2016, Grassley runs down the Senate floor right after FBI Director Comey gives his famous "Hillary was careless, but no reasonable prosecutor would bring prosecution against her."
Right.
Grassley ran onto the Senate floor immediately, reacted to his statement, and here's what he says. It was fantastic. What he had was a huge announcement that forged an alliance of the White Hats immediately. It emboldened them because they knew they had it. So they started fighting back. So what he said, and I'm just going to read one paragraph. This is Grassley's statement. While Director Comey made it clear that Secretary Clinton and her staff were extremely careless in handling classified information, he also recommended no criminal prosecution, even though gross negligence regarding classified information is a crime. If it wants to avoid giving the impression that the FBI was pulling punches, because many people in a similar situation would face some sort of consequence, the agency must now be more transparent than ever in releasing information gathered during its investigation.
We've heard so much information now about how Peter Strzok changed the statements from gross negligence to extremely careless and all this. So obviously multiple people were involved in covering this from an early stage.
Big time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to go through how they tried to avoid the transparency even more. But this time they're being policed. Okay, now they're everybody's watching. They're on the clock. So what they've been getting away with for years, they're no longer getting away with because they're watching it. But here's the interesting way he did it. He said, there are plenty of FOIA and congressional requests that are pending in my office. They have been on hold because of the ongoing nature of the investigation. So now, based on Comey's speech, I expect the FBI should respond fully and completely to all of them. Did they? No, they ignored them. Great evidence is now being aggregated. So now Grassley comes out on the floor and talks about, in July 6th in a letter, that he starts to lay out his case against Comey and Lynch handling of the Hillary Clinton email matter. And again, this letter goes unresponded because they were waiting. They were going to ride it out till she got elected and sweep it all under the rug. So this is a key element to Grassley's oversight strategy. He generates a paper trail of demand letters for information. When those demands are unmet, he then returns it to the IG. There goes the cycle of information of them working together. The problem is the IG has been blocked by the Obama administration, and this is why Grassley worked so hard to restore the IG Act. So in August of 2016, you started hearing about Clinton Foundation corruption. Uranium One becomes a story. Grassley sends out a letter to Lynch and Comey and wants to know why the DOJ isn't investigating those two stories. And of course, it goes unresponded. So then you start hearing about a response that is not a response directly, but a response indirectly through legal. And this is what they started calling the open secret of cover-up called bundling. So this is when Grassley and Johnson and ISA and Gates Live started referring to this in late 2017 called bundling of information to avoid release to IG requests. So remember, Comey's starting to run out of time. All right, he's trying to run out the clock with Lynch in the following way. He doesn't respond directly. So what he does do is through legal, they start bundling unclassified documents with classified documents in order they not be separated. So Comey violated the law with regards to this in EO 13526, and he would do this again for the Iran deal in September. He just couldn't put down the shovel when it came to digging his own grave. Again, the hubris of these people. So by doing this bundling, he was using another tactic of red taping and stalling tactic to try to ride this out till she came into office. The problem is she didn't win. And they had all of this evidence. So now we're in late 2016 and Grassley talks about the unusual secrecy. He talks about the Wilkinson letters and the unusual secrecy. The FBI improperly bundled, this is on the floor, him talking, these unclassified reports with a very small amount of classified information and told the Senate and the Judiciary Committee to treat it all as classified. Clever, but illegal and improper, which of course is a pattern at the FBI at the top for years. So now we get into the Wilkinson letters, Grassley, Nunez, Goodlatte, and Chaffetz letter to Lynch, where the Department of Justice lawyers drafted letters with and for Cheryl Mills. The Samuelson, who was the attorney, agreeing to destroy laptops and severely limit the scope of the Clinton investigation. So they fired off letters. Now, the letters to the Department of Justice from Grassley that I've given you says from the attorney Beth Wilkinson on behalf of her clients Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson, and what become, I misspoke a while ago and said Samuelson was the attorney. She was actually the client. In what becomes known as the Wilkinson letters. The Wilkinson letters were dated about June 2016, and they were mostly incorporated by reference into the immunity agreements for Ms. Mills and Ms. Samuelson related to the FBI's criminal investigation of former Secretary Clinton's email server. Remember, when we heard about these immunities, we were all ticked off. Like, why are people getting immunity deals? So Grassley continues in his letter to Attorney General Lynch, I want to express our concern about the process by which Congress was allowed to view the Wilkinson letters, that the letters inappropriately restrict the scope of the FBI's investigation, and that the FBI inexplicably agreed to destroy the laptops knowing that the content were the subject of congressional subpoenas and preservation letters. This is basically accusing them of obstruction of justice publicly, okay? So due to the non-response from Lynch's office in late 2016, Grassley calls on the IG's office in Horowitz to investigate the FBI and Department of Justice improper handling of the Clinton investigation. Note, attached letter to Horowitz. This is what Grassley said. The entire matter is in desperate need of independent, objective, and nonpartisan oversight. As the Inspector General, that is your statutory duty. End of sentence. Attached, please find 2 previous letters that I sent to the FBI that went unanswered. So, in December 10th of 2016, we now know the IG power was fully restored. We're getting into the 2017 and the end of 2016, where Grassley starts waging this methodical campaign against the corruption in FBI and DOJ. Now, again, we started this corruption investigation with the oversight role that he has of FOIA and FOIA requests and the non-compliance of these requests. Now, this investigation has grown into further investigation of the other behaviors of the FBI and DOJ with respect to obstruction. So he starts to write some letters and starts involving Horowitz. So Horowitz is united with Grassley when it comes to oversight. So I call them heroes. They're doing this at their own personal peril. Remember, personal peril is real when you're going up against the Clintons. But I don't think calling them heroes is overstated. Or now we're in early 2017. So now we got the newly empowered IG working with the SJC, and all of the investigation is starting to aggregate all of these documents. Now, the initial focus ranged from the FBI's handling of the Clinton email, whether or not Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe should have recused from the investigation, ostensibly over 700,000 his wife campaign that we've learned from Charles recently, it's over 1 million.
Yep.
They took from Terry and McAuliffe around the time of the email investigation, to any and all potential collusion with the Clinton campaign and the timing of various FOIA releases. Keep in mind that the IG has reported finding to Grassley and Goodlatte, because they're the ones that had launched the investigation request. By law and rule, he has to do what the committee requests. So the IG investigation creates an information cycle with that information flowing through the Department of State's IG. Grassley knows this, which is why he shifts gears to lay the foundation for more and more questions and more release of documents. What you saw is a pattern. Senate Judiciary Committee, request to the IG reporting back to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the IG's report being made public and people talking about it on the floor. That cycle is what's has led us up to this FISA memo. It's all part of a coordinated cycle of effort through the Senate Judiciary Committee and the efforts of Grassley. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, we still had to deal with Comey. This 2017 Trump's in, but Comey's still in office, but not for much longer. Remember, in March of 2017, something became known as the Christopher Steele created dossier.
Right.
Grassley opened 2017 sequence of demand letters with a huge letter announcement. It's become known as the 12 questions for Comey letter. All these questions about how the FBI handled the things related to the dossier. You know, were there any government officials, inside or outside, had anything to do with it? Were there any agreements and payments? You know, who all was involved? How did the FBI first obtain the dossier? Who was it that put it out, etc.? Now, in 2017, Grassley zeroes in on McCabe. Knowing that Andy recused himself from the Clinton investigation, Grassley wants to know about his involvement with the Trump investigation with the letter that involved 12 questions. He says, to the best of your knowledge, Mr. McCabe, has anyone within the FBI filed a complaint with the Department of Justice or the Inspector General regarding McCabe's involvement in the investigation? Have personnel from the Department of Justice Office of the IG spoken with you as yet as part of the OIG of the office's investigation into Mr. McCabe's alleged conflict of interest into the Clinton investigation? Now remember, this is Comey's response he's waiting on. Has anyone at FBI, the Department of Justice, or the Department of Justice Office of the IG recommended or requested that Mr. McCabe recuse himself from the investigation of Mr. Trump's associates or from any ongoing investigations of the Clinton Foundation? If so, what action was taken in response? So these were specifically lined out, and of course, Comey never responded. Now, what did happen, because Comey didn't respond to the March Steele inquiries and the Grassley letters and the questions, what came out was we started hearing new information about Steele and Fusion GPS. Grassley's March questions still stand, and he continues to send more requests with questions that are going unanswered. Again, they now cannot get away with not answering because the excuse back then was, we're just going to wait for her to get in office.
Right.
They're just continuing the same behavior with hubris, but there's going to be repercussions. You cannot ignore the Senate Judiciary Committee, but they did. So what we see is clearly a transition like that witnessed in 2016, where Grassley transitioned from the Clinton to the FBI DOJ's handling of Clinton. Now he's looking into how the FBI handled the Steele dossier. So now it's May, and Grassley's setting his sights on Rosenstein. So just 72 hours after assuming his new and temporary head of the FBI position after Comey was fired, Rosenstein gets buried with all those unanswered questions that everyone was ignoring. And typical Grassley, and he fires letters and goes to the floor. And here now Lynch has run out the clock about the questions for the DOJ remains. So Grassley is primary DOJ oversight with an empowered IG backing him up. So the only thing that'll get him off the back of the Department of Justice is some satisfactory answers from them or the IG. And guess what? They didn't get them. So Goodlatte and Grassley decide to throw out what's called the cloud of doubt hangs over the FBI. And most people didn't notice it at the time, but it led to something. May 3rd, 2017, the cloud of doubt hangs over the FBI letter. And guess what? Grassley off his opening statement with info on Steele dossier, Fusion GPS, and guess what? A week later, Comey's fired as a result of that letter and presentation. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. So now we're in June of 2017, and we're in the FISA applications. Now we're leading up to current events. Grassley followed up his March 6th demand letter to Comey with one to Rosenstein and McCabe, zeroing in on classified FBI FISA application and FISC documents. So now in July of 2017, Grassley called on the Department of Justice to appoint a special counsel, detailing their concerns in 14 questions pertaining to actions taken by previously public figures like Lynch, Comey, and Clinton. The questions range from things like Loretta Lynch directed Mr. Comey to mislead the American people, Secretary Clinton's mishandling of classified information, mishandling of her email investigation, Department of Justice failure to impanel a grand jury, questions about the Clinton Foundation, Uranium One, FBI relying on the Trump-Russia dossier created by Fusion GPS, and so on, to request the FISA court approval of the Trump spying. Now we're in August of 2017. So Grassley flips the Russian narrative, and Grassley released sworn testimony from Bill Browder. Remember, Bill Browder testified of Fusion GPS that they took money from the Russian government, and second, that it did so while it was working on the Steele dossier, which completely switches the Russian collusion argument, because the truth is, what little elements of Russia involvement in this entire case was actually being on the side of Clinton and the corrupt DOJ officials, along with Christopher Steele. So now Grassley fires off a letter on August 30th to FBI Director Wray on the drafting of Comey's statement exonerating Hillary. So Grassley uses testimony from Comey's Chief of Staff, Rybicki, and a Department of Justice lawyer confirming the FBI statement was crafted before Clinton and 16 others were even interviewed. Remember that. So now this letter is a key document. Everything needed to appoint a special counsel is contained with it. The letters preceding it were all precursors, and the ones after were add-ons. In my opinion, all the OIG has to do now is reinforce that letter, and a special counsel will be appointed. So now the Senate Judiciary Committee, starting in September and October, kept repeating their call to the Department of Justice for a special counsel, pointing out that former FBI Director James Comey lied to Congress when he said that he decided not to recommend criminal charges against Clinton until after she was interviewed. Now we know, when in fact Comey had drafted her exoneration before said interview. What I've been told is when they did the interview with Clinton, it was to go over all of the ways that they were going to handle it in advance. You know, kind of two buddies getting together, okay, here's how we're going to handle this. Okay, this is what's going to come out to the public. It was a joke. So now we're in late 2017, early 2018, and Horowitz, Grassley, and the Senate Judiciary Committee have now joined forces with a new FBI Director, Christopher Wray. Now, here's how I know these indictments are real and the perp walks are coming, okay? Here's what we're going to lay out. If you remember, we discussed previously that Wray testified to the committee. Remember that testimony? I want to quote some things that he said. We will evaluate what the IG finds, end quote. Wray also says we, the FBI and DOJ, would have to take steps in response. Have to. Not might. Have to. So if they have to take, that's why I believe these indictments are real. Wray also made some other statements that foreshadow. This is him quoted. What else might need to be done to unring that bell, if you will, he said. So it depends a lot on the particulars of what the IG found. I would not rule out anything appropriate that would be in response to the Inspector General's findings. Jason and Joe, that's not double talk. That's direct answer. That is not Comey speak. That is foretelling what the intentions are of the FBI white hats. Wray, on multiple occasions, expressed his readiness to take action in response to the findings of the IG. And he looked forward, he said, to Horowitz findings. And now Congress has reviewed that report. So the House and Senate Judiciary Committees began to use it to supplement their own individual investigation. That's what Nunez FISA 702 program menu is about. It is using the OIG report to supplement that investigation. So that's the first one to drop. Now, this is why the Department of Justice response is critical. Wray says he will follow the recommendations and bring investigations and changes to policy in the FBI, in both personnel and procedures, and even it went into reopening of prior investigations. In short, just about everything. Why is that important, Jason and Joe? Because the immunity agreements that were forged back then can also be rescinded. All roads lead to the White House, and here's what the grenade I'm going to lob to you, Joe. You're going to catch it in your lap. The White House was using the same illegal email, private server, and NGO oversight to avoid FOIA requests, just like Hillary.
Yeah.
The memo is the beginning of that information being made public eventually. It's commonplace. Everybody's doing it. Selling access to your corporate sponsors and trying to avoid FOIA detection is the way of the world in the past 8 years, even going further. The next step is going to be the indictments, the release of the FISA. There, it's over. The storm's here. The storm's starting to finish. Now we're going to start hearing the stories. There is no more it's coming. It's already here today. Forgive me for doing this, but I was told to say this. I needed to put this out, this message. Patriots point, we will follow. I was asked by the White Hats to say that at the end of my presentation today. So do your research and find out what that means.